everyone, thanks so much for joining our SmartArt presentation featuring Pablo Picasso. I'm Alexis Magnano.
And I'm Lindsay Blisco.
Pablo Picasso was one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. He was a Spanish artist who lived from 1881 to 1973. He created over 50,000 works of art during his lifetime. And one of my favorite quotes of his is, "All children are artists. The problem is how to remain one once he or she grows up."
Picasso was born on October 25th, 1881, on the southern coast of Malaga. After birth, he changed his name to Pablo Picasso due to the length of his birth name. Picasso was christened Ruiz after his father, and after his mother is where he gained Picasso. In the traditional Spanish way is how he got his names. He grew up in a modest household where his father, Jose Ruiz Blasco, supported his family by teaching drawing at the local art school. This is also where he began his life of art.
Pablo Picasso's life was divided into periods based on his moods and the styles of his paintings, which were affected by his personal issues and his evolving love life. He had 6 major artistic periods. The first one, 1901 to 1904, the Blue period. The second one was 1905 to 1906, the Rose period. The third was 1907 to 1909, the Black or African period. The fourth, 1907 to 1919, which was the Cubism period, and that included analytic and synthetic. The fifth was Neoclassicism from 1917 to 1925, and his last period was Surrealism from 1925 to 1932. The first period is the Blue period, which was from 1901 to 1904. It was influenced by the death of one of his best friends, who committed suicide by shooting himself in the face in a very public area. And you can tell it's very monochromatic and shades of blue and blue-green. And it's said that the blue hue that is prevalent in a lot of his pictures was based off of the color of his friend's dead face, which is cheerful. This is The Old Guitarist, and it's from 1903. It was painted just after his friend's suicide, and you can tell that the man is blind, and his bent body is holding a guitar very close to his chest. It's a very large round guitar, and the guitar's brown body represents the only shift in the painting's color. It's the only color that's not blue or blue-green. And both physically and symbolically, the instrument fills the space around the solitary figure who seems oblivious to his blindness and his poverty as he plays.
The Rose period was from 1905 to 1906. During this period, Picasso lived in Montmartre in Paris, among the Bohemian poets and writers, so it was French-inspired. This period is full of vivid hues of red, orange, pink, and many other earth tones, one of his most famous pieces being Boy with a Pipe. He used this time to experiment with his art in many different ways. Going more into detail on one of his paintings from the Rose period, this is the family of saltimbanques, which was painted in 1905 in the beginning of the Rose period. Immediately obvious is the isolation and stillness of its figures. You may ask, why aren't they all smiling? Well, the painting pays tribute to the circus's characters while also serving as an autobiography. The dark, brooding silhouette of Harley Quinn, which is one of the many characters that keeps popping up throughout his art, in the diamond-printed costume on the far left is the dark, intense young Picasso himself.
Up next is the Black or African influence period from 1907 to 1909. This period was influenced by a lot of African art, and as you can see on the left, there are 2 African masks, and we are going to go into depth on the middle picture. This is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. In this picture, the women are supposed to look not conventionally feminine, and it features 5 young women who were prostitutes on a Barcelona brothel. And if you look, the figure on the left is supposed to look Egyptian or Southern Asian. And the two middle figures are based on Iberian sculptures from Spain, which was where he grew up. And the two figures on the right have faces that appear as if they're wearing masks and are made to look primitive and savage, like an African mask. His next period was Cubism, and it was broken up into two sections. It was from 1907 to 1919, and two of his famous artworks from this period were Girl with Mandolin from 1910 and Still Life with a Bottle of Rum.
Analytic Cubism was from 1907 to 1912. Starting in this time, Picasso worked with a French painter named Georges Braque to develop the analytical Cubism movement. Analytical Cubism uses forms like the cylinder, sphere, and the cone to represent the natural world. These paintings relied on a palette of monochromatic earth tones, including gray, blue, and ochre. Here we can see Majoli, which means my pretty one in French. In this composition, Picasso takes apart a traditional subject, being a woman holding a guitar. He composed the figure into different planes, angles, lines, and shadings, completely abstracting the face. Majoli, which I had previously mentioned, means my pretty one, is inscribed on the bottom of the painting. It is also the nickname of Picasso's girlfriend at the time. Now we are going to take a closer look at the painting and where you can see the Majoli written on the bottom.
The later section of Cubism was called synthetic Cubism, and as you can see, the shapes in these paintings are not three-dimensional. So this period was working on flattening the three-dimensional shapes, and he was expanding the color palette and adding new textures and simpler shapes. Here is Mandolin and Guitar from 1924, and as you can see, the color palette is a lot brighter than his other Cubism period. And if you look closely on the bottom of the floor, you can see the raked pattern right here where my cursor is. And that is supposed to look like a stage. And the balcony right here is supposed to look like a painted set, also implying that it is a stage.
Picasso adopted the neoclassical style in 1917, which represents a sharp contrast to the abstract characteristics of synthetic cubism. This change occurred shortly after Picasso's first visit to Italy, where he was inspired by the naturalism found in Italian Renaissance paintings. This time period was also at the end of World War I, where art tended to reflect more of a restoration of order. A typical example of this neoclassicism style is two women running on the bench, which you can see on the far left. On the beach. This is a small panel done by Picasso in 1922. Again, we can see a more natural palette through these art pieces.
His next period was Surrealism from 1925 to 1932. This was following Neoclassicism, and he moved away from naturalism. He was working in a surrealist style that characterized dreamy depictions, and the surreal quality is emphasized by using an unnatural palette of bright and clashing tones. If you look at this picture, it's called The Three Dancers, and it was made in 1925. The one on the right is barely visible, and a macabre dance is taking place between the dancer on the left, and her head is bent at a nearly impossible angle. This is one of his most famous works. It's called Guernica, and it was painted during the 1930s. He painted it to depict the Spanish Civil War, and it was supposed to reflect the violence of the war at this time. The painting was a reaction to the Nazis' bombing of the Basque town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. Guernica shows the tragedies of war and the suffering it inflicts upon individuals, most specifically innocent civilians. This work has gained monumental status, becoming a perpetual reminder of the tragedies of war, and an anti-war symbol and an embodiment of peace.
Moving on to his later years, which were during World War II, Picasso remained in Paris, which was under German occupation, enduring Gestapo harassment while he continued to create some of his art. Some of the time he wrote poetry, completing more than 300 works between 1939 and 1959. He also completed 2 plays, Desire Caught by the Tail and The Four Little Girls, both a few years after Paris was liberated in 1944, which was when he had a child named Claude in 1947. Picasso remained in Paris throughout World War II, where he mainly focused on sculpting. One of his most famous pieces during this time was Chicago Picasso, which he donated to the city of Chicago. Sadly, he did die quite a while ago in 1961 at the age of 79. Him and his second wife did try to lead a more quiet and peaceful life by buying a castle in the countryside. In his final years, Picasso experienced a flurry of creativity. Unlike his previous work, the pieces produced during this time are not categorized into certain styles, as they each incorporate different elements of his past periods. Picasso continued to paint until his death in 1973 at age 92. His wife ended up burying him on the grounds of their castle, where the two of them remain to this day.
As we come to the end of our presentation, here are some of Pablo Picasso's self-portraits representing a few of his art periods throughout the years. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.